To the special meeting for the 16th of February 2022. The meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank all of those of you in the room today with us and acknowledge everyone watching via Council's social media channels. I acknowledge the Mayor, Portfolio Leader Councillor Carl, Councillors, the CEO, the General Manager of Planning and Development. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarowair peoples, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, the rich traditions and the bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. Item number 2 is attendance, including apologies. We have one leave of absence, which is Councillor Melissa Taylor. There's no declarations, so we move to, I need someone to move that we suspend standing orders. Councillor McDonald, Councillor Shine, all those in favour? It's carried.
Madam Chair,
yes, Councillor.
In perusing the information before us here, A, it's code accessible. B, there are very, very, very minor changes which I would have the faith in our staff to do. I just wonder why we're going through the whole process of doing this when we have competent staff who can actually make these decisions.
Well, I'll just get the General Manager, Councillor.
I have to ask the question, having perused it a couple of times.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Basically, there are a couple of areas where it doesn't exactly tick the box, and I think staff felt that, given that that was the case, they would bring it to council for a decision. If in fact if it wasn't in, I guess, an area such as this, and if it certainly ticked all the boxes, then it wouldn't be in front of you. It's a classic delegated item. But there are a couple of areas where it just doesn't meet the code, and the officers will go through that in some detail with council just to explain where it doesn't meet the code and why they think that where it doesn't meet the code is not critical to the ultimate decision that is needed in regard to this particular site.
Thank you. I still have my own opinion on it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Now, item number 4 is the reconfiguration of a lot code, 2 lots into 3, located at 95 Campbell Street, East Toowoomba. And our planner, Tamara Katai, is going to take us through. Thank you, Tamara.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councillors and guests. The report before you today considers a development application for reconfiguring a lot, 2 lot into 3 lot subdivision at 95 Campbell Street, East Toowoomba. The lots are located in the low-medium density residential zone of the Toowoomba Regional Planning Scheme 2012. The application site comprises of 2 lots being 761 metres squared in area each. The lots are improved by a multiple dwelling and an auxiliary structure. The existing development also includes landscaping, which is typical to a residential use, as well as a street tree and bluestone curbing within the street frontage. The proposal seeks to remove the existing buildings and subdivide the 2 lots into 3 narrower lots, being 508 metres squared in area each. Each of the proposed lots have the dimensions of 10 by 0.58 metres by 50.554 metres. The development application is code accessible against the relevant benchmarks of the planning scheme. This includes the reconfirming the lot code and the neighbourhood character overlay code, given that the development site is located within that overlay. The assessment of the application identified that the proposal does not comply with the relevant requirements, these codes, and therefore it is considered that council has authority to refuse the application in accordance with the Planning Act. However, the non-compliance of the reconfirming lot code can be considered minimal, in that the non-compliance results from minor lot length exceedance of 26 centimetres. Should the proposed lots be slightly shorter, the application would comply with the code. The non-compliance with the neighbourhood character overlay code is considered to be more significant. This is because the narrow width of the lots are considered inconsistent with the existing character of the area and would likely result in a built form which is also inconsistent with what exists currently. In saying this, the lots are of a sufficient size and dimensioning to be able to accommodate future development with an acceptable built form. It is further noted that with the current planning scheme, any future development on the proposed lots would require development applications which would be assessed by council officers. During the assessment of the application, stormwater overland flow issues were also identified by council's engineers. This overland flow is subject to ongoing investigation and is not formally identified on our published flood mapping. However, it is considered to be relevant as it is a current stormwater issue. The applicant has indicated that the stormwater will not be resolved as part of this current subdivision application. The likelihood of the application resulting in the worsening of this issue is considered low in itself. This risk would increase with development involving new buildings. Since stormwater is unlikely to be accessible as part of future development applications, it is considered that the issue will need to be resolved as part of this application. Therefore, amendments to the submitted stormwater management plan to appropriately address the overland flow characteristics of the site are considered necessary and can be conditioned. Section 60 of the Planning Act offers broad discretion for the approval powers of assessment managers. This means that a development application does not have to comply with all of the assessment benchmarks in order for it to be approved. In this instance, in spite of the proposed development's non-compliance with the relevant assessment benchmarks, it is the officer's recommendation that the development application is approved subject to conditions, including an amended stormwater management plan that appropriately addresses the overland flow characteristics of the site in accordance with Section 60 of the Act. This recommendation is on the basis that the proposal's non-compliance with the reconfirming lot code are very minor and the non-compliance with the neighbourhood character overlay code is not considered fatal, as future development would be subject to future assessment for a material change of use. Thank you.
Sorry, questions, Councillor
Thank you,
Taylor.
Madam Chair.
Tara Taylor.
I've looked here and I can't find it. A few questions. The length of the frontage of each block? Because I can't see it there.
Councillor, through the chair, the frontage of each block would be 10.058 metres, which is being proposed.
058 metres. The street tree, how will should this be approved, how will it be retained in the new configuration?
So plans and development material have been submitted which demonstrate that the street tree can be retained and a driveway can be appropriately, provided to each lot without in fact affecting the integrity of the street tree.
Thank you very much. And the third one, if I may, Madam Chair, thank you. Is there any requirement for any new buildings to be sympathetic to the character of the neighbourhood?
Councillor, through the chair, that would be the predominant assessment benchmarks for any new applications would be to make sure that it's consistent with the existing character.
Thank you.
Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. I just was wondering that thing you said about lot length exceedance of 26 centimetres, page 26 of board books, when the applicant, as you're aware, the current layout marginally exceeds the acceptable width to length ratio by 26 whole centimetres. Can you just tell me what width to length ratio is and why we should care about 26 centimetres, basically?
Councillor, through the chair, that's one of the reasons why we've brought it to council, is that it's, a minimal infraction on the planning scheme. So because of that minimal, infraction, it becomes inconsistent with essentially the entirety of the reconfirming lot code. So it's that 26 centimetres which...
Right. So what is the width to length ratio, just in plain terms?
Yeah.
Wendy, do you mind getting up the proposal plan, please?
I guess if you don't have a ratio, you can end up with a 6-inch wide block that goes for 200 metres.
Okay.
That's to be extremely ridiculous, but make sure you have a regular shaped block.
Cool.
So yes, councillors, as you can see, you'll have the width, which is
50?
this way, and the depth, which is this way. And as Stuart indicated, generally you want, a certain width to depth ratio so that you don't end up with some really strange size blocks which would create I guess, an issue in terms of the continuity of the block design in the street. And here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tamara, I think the depth is about 23 centimetres
26
too long.
centimetres too long.
26 centimetres too long.
Right. Okay, well, thanks for clarifying, Danielle. My other question was just, initially, prior to coming here, the 10-metre width at the front was of concern to me. I think when you put a driveway there and that's all we've got, that's pretty minimal. But I noticed on page 1 of the report, if I go back to there, it said, because very slightly shorter, smaller or even narrower lots would comply. So we've got a ratio limit, do we have a front width generally limit, or you can do anything as long as it's opposed to the ratios?
Councillor, through the chair, in the planning scheme, in the reconfiguring the lot code, there are minimum frontages that need to be met. In saying that, an applicant can come in and request, I guess, narrow frontage on the basis that they can demonstrate that it can be developed with the intention of the zone and any other overlays that would, I guess, apply to that specific development site.
Can I just comment too? In North Toowoomba, just north of Bridge Street, there's a whole estate with lots that are 11.356 metres wide. So it's not new having narrower lots. And similar to this site, I guess, back in the time when they developed a lot of those lots, some people bought 2 lots to build a bigger house. Other people didn't. They just used the lots and built their cottages on the issue, of course, is that back then they built cottages. They built the size of house that fitted the lot. And today there tends to be a matter of having a smaller lot with a larger house. But the point here, though, is that whatever house is built on any one of these sites will need a planning approval from the guys who will be applying council's character policies in regard to any approval given for a house.
So just on that, Stuart, just for my general knowledge, as far as I'm aware, when you build a house, it's got to be, I think, 900 from a boundary fence. And so when you've only got 10 metres to play with and your driveway's, 6, and you've only got really 9 metres to play with, we're talking a heck of a skinny house here that's probably goes or 2-storey or whatever.
It's amazing what good architects can do
right.
with a site.
Thank you.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, thanks very much, Madam Chair. Tamara, so I guess the only area it sounds like contention is around stormwater, really, as far as the planners are concerned. So the condition that's been put on for this approval, will it then, as you said earlier, that a building approval won't require a stormwater approval? So once this is done for this site, they won't need any other mitigation from stormwater from a building approval? Is that how that works?
Councillor, through the chair, it would really come down to how, I guess, quickly our flood mapping will be updated and whether that would have any bearing on, I guess, any future development. So at the moment, if we assess it under the current planning scheme provisions, it would only be assessed against the neighbourhood character overlay code. So stormwater doesn't play a big part in that, which is why we would have to address it now rather than leave it to a later point, because we won't have that ability to be able to assess it like we do now.
Okay, thank you for that. Is the applicant speaking at all? Is there?
He's available to answer
Okay,
questions.
right, oh, that's right. Well, I guess that was my only question, was around the stormwater and how that's mitigated on, what we're doing here is actually just reconfiguring a lot. So removal of an existing place and splitting the lot into 3. So from a stormwater mitigation measure, does that mean that they then have to put drainage around the outside of lots, or how does that actually work on the ground?
Councillor, through the chair, so the stormwater material that was submitted to us as part of the development application hasn't appropriately demonstrated how that will be managed. And that's one of the reasons why we're asking for an amended stormwater management plan to be provided as part of this specific approval, is so they can demonstrate how that stormwater, where that stormwater is and how that stormwater will function.
Can I also add that certainly building certifiers are concerned about drainage and water, stormwater, sewerage, sullage, and those relevant matters. So when you get a building approval, your certifier will want to know how you're getting your roof water, in particular, to a legal point of discharge, whether that is an existing stormwater pipe or the street.
Sure. And I guess that's where I'm just trying to understand, if I'm getting this in my mind, there's a dwelling on there at the moment that covers a fair footprint on the lot. It then gets shifted, so it was a site that would collect water and it would go somewhere. With nothing on the site and ground, the water would then either soak in the ground or move. So this plan will show what that is, and then it'll change when there's 3 dwellings on there as well. That's why
That's right.
I was just trying to work out what they would do now to change, that may change when you've got dwellings on there, which obviously would
That's
shift
right.
it again.
They'll also, under council's rules, have a water tank. They're detached dwellings, they'll have a water tank requirement.
So just final one from me. Under the current code, it's been suggested, recommended to approve. They then would have to come back for a building approval, and then if it goes outside the code there, it would have to come back as an impact, perhaps come back as an impact.
A planning approval is required.
Building approval.
And a building approval.
Yeah.
Yep, both.
Yeah. If it goes outside of the code.
No.
Or,
Anyway.
No, to council I'm talking about. To council. For council to, like we've done today,
Yep.
it's a code assessable application.
Yep.
It's been recommended for approval from officers. So when or if an application for building comes in,
Yep.
if it fits to the code under the building code,
Yep.
it wouldn't have to come to council for
it
another
would not.
approval.
No,
Okay.
no. It could be a private certifier.
That's
Yep.
yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Councillor Summerfield?
Thank you. Thanks, Tamara. And look, I'm more than comfortable that staff have decided to bring this to council, and please feel free that there be no restrictions on you doing that into the future. If you need guidance from us, I certainly support you doing that. I just wanted to talk about the design, and I know it's got to come back, but this reminds me of Joffrey Street. You recall that we had a lot of pushback in the community, the Joffrey Street community, about what the new buildings were going to look like, and they've turned out absolutely beautiful, and they've enhanced that street, and that's just up and around the corner from where we're talking about. So that area is quite historically significant. That whole character overlay is so important for this development, and so I can see there's great opportunity for a really good outcome for Campbell Street. It's our most prominent street, really, in the city, and I think it's important that we do get good outcomes. And so if we can ensure that we get an outcome, and I don't know if anyone remembers, but the width of those homes in Joffrey Street, I don't think they were 10 metres. I'm pretty sure mine's not 10 metres. So I reckon mine's only about 8, but I might be wrong. I'll have to go home and measure it. So I think there is opportunity to get a good outcome, and I'm hoping that we can do everything we can, use every pedal to make sure that we do get a really nice outcome for Campbell Street. Thank you.
I might just, if I could, have my question now, which is a similar sort of thing on the design outcome. So I just note in the report on page 19 of 24, it says there about what might come. It says, however, it's noted that most of these lots have dual frontages. This is talking about the southern side. And it says that will not be viable for the proposed lots, which are anticipated to require prominent front garages and driveway parking, presenting a different character to the existing character of the street. So how are we going to address those design concerns, given that they need the off-street parking and all of the rest?
Madam Chair, that is actually a really good question, and it's one of those things where, not being an architect myself, but Peter Freeman can certainly have his say if he so wishes. I don't think we will ever be able to move away from that front garage in this instance. I don't think there's an opportunity there to really have to put the car parking at the back, which is what we really try to seek with these type of developments. But in saying that, there is potential there to come up with a solution that would, I guess, remove a lot of the bulk of the garage that faces the street and try to make it blend into the building itself, to remove a lot of that prominence that would come with something like like a garage door per se. So if you have, there's buildings across the street that are relatively new dwelling houses. They do have the advantages of having 2 or 3 street frontages, which means that they can put their garage at the back and have the house presenting at the street. Unfortunately, in this instance, we don't have that. So when it comes in for assessment against the Neighbourhood Character Overlay Code, we would be responsible for making sure that they come up with an outcome that, although we can't move away from that front, the car parking in the front setback, to make sure that it blends in as much as possible and tries to take away from that, dominance that you otherwise see with a lot of the new builds.
And Madam Chair, it's 10 metres, and we're looking at it, if it's a single garage configuration, that's about 3.4 metres. So that leaves a reasonable amount to play with. And what our architects do try to achieve is that the garage is set back, that the house is given some prominence, the design of the house, the character of the house comes through and is not dominated by the car parking arrangement. And you can have you can have tandem. You could have your tandem garage if you wish, which affects the amount of house you have, but also you would try and get so you have a car that can park in front of that garage so that you have adequate off-street car parking for that dwelling. But I mean, a good architect will certainly look at those issues. And is Peter here or not? Oh, he is. Sorry, Peter, I couldn't see you. But certainly, 10 metres can be worked with a good architect.
What I'm asking is, do we have the teeth in our scheme so that we do get a good outcome and not just go, well, it's kind of, because that's the criticality of it,
I'll just clarify some statements that were made before. If this application was approved, no one could come and just get a building works approval and construct a house on these lots. There would be the interim step of them requiring a development approval from council for a dwelling on each of the individual lots. That would be subject to assessment against the Neighbourhood Character Overlay Code, and through the application of those code provisions, that's where we would ensure that we get an appropriate design outcome that ensures that that future development is as much as possible in keeping with the appropriate character of that locality. So you'd have reconfig approval, there'd then be a planning approval, I guess, for the dwellings, and then you'd get your building works approval to actually go and construct the dwellings.
Thanks, Sonia. Councillor Carol Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot of comment around this, and I have to say that with the map on page 37 of 44, if you have a look at that, the 2 blocks the way they are, this property has built over 2 blocks. If you have a look at all the other houses around there, you'll find, and you can only find something a little bit similar at the back there, where there's 3 blocks but nowhere near as narrow as these are. We have to remember, and I take Councillor Nancy's point about narrow blocks, but there's an era for short, small, narrow blocks. I mean, out in Greenmount, you've got a house that goes over 5 blocks because they were very old, very narrow, very small. But this is Campbell Street.
Councillor Taylor, are you wanting to debate? Have you got a question?
I'm not wanting to debate, but I'm wanting to... I've heard all the architecture and everything else. I cannot see how a house can be built here. And I know we're not debating that now, but I can't see how a house can be built here without the garage dominating or the car being out on the street. So I'd need to be reassured about that, because we are making a decision on the reconfiguration, but it seems to me to be a little bit pointless if we can't get a character home with something that is sympathetic, at least, with the area, So there doesn't seem to me to be a lot of point in doing one without the other.
Yeah, look, I understand. I think General Manager's just spoken to that point. Councillor Carl?
Thanks, Chair. Do we have any photos, a
Not to
street
my
view of the
satisfaction.
existing residents there now, existing flats or units?
I think Danielle presented. There it is. Yeah.
It is there. Just the one with the handle.
So, in looking at that, I too had a question around stormwater, but since, if you go to page 1 of the report, and there's a question around the applicant not wanting to resolve stormwater now, and considering 3 10.58 metre frontages, 3 driveways, 3 roofed areas, perhaps some sealed area out the rear of the house, that's a lot of impervious layer to the block in general as it sits there now, which will be 3. But I note here, at the back end of that paragraph at the bottom of the page, the applicant indicated they would not resolve this as it was not related to the current endorsed mapping. However, it is considered to be related to a current real stormwater issue. The likelihood that the current subdivision application in itself would worsen an existing stormwater problem is considered low. However, the risk that future development which involves new buildings worsens an existing stormwater problem is considered higher. So I guess, and then if you go over to page 3 of the report, it talks about council approval of plans, documents and operational works, and it covers off driveways, stormwater works, earthworks required, identified stormwater management report. I just wanted to see what we're potentially replacing here with this potential approval. And I just wonder if that's a character house with Campbell Street. Probably think not, but anyway.
Councillor to the Chair, no, the proposed, or the development site, sorry, is not a listed character place.
Thanks. Anyway, I'll save my comments for debate if there is any, but I'm comfortable that we deal with stormwater at this stage
I agree.
of the front end of this application for 1 into 3, as per the officer's recommendation.
No, it's not.
So can we just clarify that? We are conditioning it at this stage for the stormwater.
No.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Councillor McMahon?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just wanted to ask a general question. So the current house is not character listed overlay. I was driving.
That's correct.
I was driving through suburban Darling Heights this weekend gone, and there was a house half knocked down, which I thought was an interesting sight in suburbia. Is this something that council? And I know we're talking about the lot reconfiguration, but is this something that council manages or has concerns with when it's not character? You can go for your life, knock down a house?
Councillor to the Chair, that's correct. So if it's a neighbourhood character place, it would be impact assessable and they would have to demonstrate that, look, it can't be retained. But given that it's not a character place, there's no provisions in place for demolition.
Yeah, righto, thanks.
Can't go for your life, councillor, but you can get a building approval
Oh, yeah.
to demolish
Don't
without
wanna
having to
the
get a planning
Cowboys out,
approval.
but you can do it properly, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Shine?
Thanks, Chair. Just wondering if the heritage architect, Mr Freeman, might be able to give us his thoughts on it. I notice in page 1, it says, however, despite the inconsistency, it is still considered that the proposed development can accommodate future development with an acceptable built form from the streetscape character. Under the current planning scheme provisions, this would be subject to future assessment that we've talked about. But in the previous paragraph, it says that putting aside the shorter distance in that one, just referring to the character overlay, the proposed development does not comply with all relevant assessment benchmarks, notably the purpose and overall outcomes of the refiguring a lot code and neighbourhood character overlay code. It does not comply. Why are we allowing it?
Tamara, would you feel comfortable to answer that?
Councillor to the Chair, that is, I guess one of the crux of the issues of this development application is that it is not consistent with the reconfirming lot code and it's not consistent with the neighbourhood character overlay code. But the basis of it not being consistent with the reconfirming lot code is the fact that it is 26 centimetres, I guess, too long per se. So that is one of the crux of the issues is that, look, they're going from something that is consistent with the existing streetscape right now to something that is inconsistent with the neighbourhood character overlay code. In saying that, should this subdivision be approved, they can more than likely come up with a solution that is acceptable. Is it going to be sympathetic? We're not quite sure. That'll be assessed when the time comes from a tool change of use application. But can it be, can they come up with a built form that is acceptable to council and meet those provisions? They most likely could.
Did you want to comment from the...
Well, yeah,
Peter?
Sure.
please.
You might need to move closer to the microphone, Peter, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have expressed concerns about this RAL. The fact that when you look at what's existing there is a substantial home. It's similar in scale to some of the other larger homes on that side of Campbell Street. It is spread over 2 lots, but it's very common for these early homes, as Stuart had mentioned, that that they're divided up into multiple lots. So it's the only home that is not listed as a character place, but it has been around for a long time. It does come up on the 1946 aerial mapping, and you'll find that on that side of Campbell Street, all the homes from that aerial mapping 1946 appear as they do today. And also what's typical of these, the important parts of our inner Toowoomba, such as this part of Campbell Street, is that these early homes, they were designed not for the intention of having, they didn't have garages and carports and things like that. That's something which wasn't common then, but is common now, is an expectation now. So the concern here is that removing this home and then placing 3 individual homes on narrow lots, trying to meet the benchmark of the code is something which is very challenging. And I know we've talked about architects and people coming up with a fantastic design, but we still don't know what that design will be. In a lot of other character areas, you've found that people generally, they want to have double garages, they don't want to have tandems. So they're pushing that sort of product. So definitely in this case, being only around 10 metres wide, having a single bay garage would be something which, as a council heritage architect, I could only support. I had major reservations about trying to put a double garage product, given you want to also have setbacks. And the fact that you're going to end up with something which is probably around sort of 2/3 the width of that front elevation for each home. But again, that's something which we'll have control to assess, but we don't know what they're going to push there. So overall, yeah, as an individual officer, I do have concerns about subdividing. So at the moment, the narrowest property on that northern side is only 15.1 metres. You've got a few that are around 18 to 20, but then you've got other homes in that street. So you've got Claremont, which is 2 houses up, which is nearly 40 metres in width. You've got another substantial heritage listed place on the corner of Campbell and Hume, which is around 35 metres in width. So you've got some really substantial sized homes there. So while this one isn't a character place, it is similar in sort of scale and size to those other homes in the street. So my concerns are that dividing up into 3 and putting 3 sort of narrow frontage homes there is going to be very challenging to meet, the requirements of the code.
If I could have thank you. I think
Okay. Welcome.
I think council dealt with recently application in the what do you call it, Scottish estate, the Caledonian estate, Burn Street from memory, and we didn't like the idea of garages in the front yard, but they might have been the depth might have been a lot less available, and I think that might be the reason. But is there a sort of a worry from a heritage point of view, character point of view, about having garages in the front of the building?
Well, I guess it does all come down to character. So the fact that the homes that are typically valued are the pre-1946 era homes, which not associated with vehicle combination being a dominant element. We think about these homes and being in a garden setting at the front. So with what you see now with development is that, I mean, obviously it's a necessity. People expect to have off-street parking, to have, garages or carports, but we have control over that. So, it depends on the width of the lot, but placing a home placing a carport, a garage beside an existing home and setting it back, as Stuart said, that means that you're still retaining the home as the main feature of that place. And the carport or garages seem to be secondary. So, the concern here is that when you bring down the width of these lots, that obviously it limits your opportunities about where you can place a carport or garage. And being only around sort of 10 metres wide, it's probably not practical to have that behind the home. It's going to be beside the home, and it's going to take up a reasonable width compared to what the your habitable rooms are going to present to the street.
And depending on the design, it may
Yes.
impact on the heritage overlay placed next to the heritage building next door as well.
Yes.
The other two things quickly, I think I remember council having discussions about the type of heritage stones, gutters.
Bluestone.
It's a bluestone curbing.
Bluestone?
Yes.
And is that a problem here? Because there wouldn't be too many there.
So you have a very deep bluestone gutter there. So Campbell Street, the gutters are very wide and deep. Plus you have a large tree there as well. So having an additional 2 crossovers there, what we call, leading to these driveways, is going to require quite a lot of works there, and it's going to interrupt that existing bluestone curbing there with a likely, modern-looking, crossover. So,
that can be addressed, can it?
There are standard details in terms of how you do that, how you do crossovers to bluestone curbs, but definitely, I guess, that sort of a visual appearance. As an architect, you can see what that frontage is going to be. You're going to see a number of driveways, as the other councillor mentioned about impervious surfaces and crossovers, compared to saying that continuous bluestone, then the pavement, and then that sort of garden setting in front of the home. So you can visualise that it's going to look quite different to what there is at the moment, and you compare to the other homes which front that street, which have on substantial width properties and garden settings. It's going to be potentially it's going to be quite different to that.
The final one, over the road on the corner of Tanner, Tana, Tana, Lane and Campbell Street, there's 2 sort of Hampton-type long-skin buildings there now. Is that a possibility they'll have 3 of those over the road? Type of
I guess sort of, in terms of the width, the widths are quite similar to what potentially is going to happen here. The one thing also Tamara Plano mentioned was that they have the benefit of where you've got one which is on a corner, a side street, and there's also a rear lane. So there was opportunities there to make the off-street parking, the garages, the carports, to be less conspicuous, which unfortunately you don't have that opportunity here with this current development.
Thank you, Peter.
Councillor Carl.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Oh, actually, were you going to ask a question of Peter? No. Oh, do you mind if I just ask a question while he's here? Okay. Did I hear you say, Peter, that all of the other houses in the street are heritage or character houses, and so we're not going to have a proliferation of this similar sort of thing because they're all protected?
That's correct. So that would require an application to demonstrate that they no longer meet the benchmarks to be a character or heritage place, or deteriorated to a point where we would consider they would need to demonstrate that they're structurally unsound and unlivable. So,
okay. All right, yeah, lovely, thank you. Yeah. Councillor Carl? Yeah, another question for Peter.
Sorry, Councillor Carl, it just seems that there's a bit of conjecture on that point. Can we get some clarity?
Tamara, did you have something?
So, Councillor, I was reviewing the neighbourhood character place list in Schedule 6 of the planning scheme, and on that northern street, or that Campbell Street, there's only 2 neighbourhood character listed places on that street. So to say that all of them are listed is incorrect. There's only 2, which is that big one to the east and the one directly to the west.
No,
Neighbourhood
97
character.
is a heritage place, 91 is a heritage place. I've checked against the schedule, 89,
Just come over to the microphone, Peter. Thanks.
Sorry. So I've also just perused the schedule. So we have the character schedule and the heritage schedule in our planning scheme. So heritage places, the one on the corner of Hume and Campbell on the northern side, number 97, is a heritage listed place. So is number 91, is a heritage listed place. And then when you going up the street on the eastern side, so from 81, 87, 85A, 85, 83, you go down to 77, they're all, to 79, the character places, and then the one on the corner with Lidwin Crescent is a heritage place.
So,
Heritage place.
meaning that they would need an impact accessible application?
Yes.
To be able to,
Yes.
yeah. Okay. Right. Clear there. Any more questions for Peter? James is, well, maybe James, when you come up, you can address that question. Councillor Carl?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I don't know, whoever wants to answer it, Danielle, Stewart, or the planning officer. Oh, sorry, I've
Tamara.
forgotten you on it. Tamara. Correct me if I'm wrong, I've done a rather rudimentary exercise here on my iPad, but if you zoom out a little bit on that shot and go to Groom Street, out, yep, and out. See where your cursor is there now? Keep going out and you see Groom Street to the north there. You had it there before, you must have.
Yeah, it must be different.
Anyway, the street to the top of the aerial view there, and there's 3 lots to the right. Keep going to the right, that's the big house. Those 3 lots there appear to be about the same frontage as these proposed here. Is that correct? Or no, that's looking at 2 lots now. Yeah, so that'd be, yeah. No, ignore my rudimentary. I shouldn't do that on an iPad, should I?
Councillor, if I can add, the most similar sized or road frontage lots would be the 2 just to the south of the development, which is the ones that have the 2 frontages.
Yes. Yep. So just a question, and that's why I raised it as the crossovers. In my view, and I think that's what you've taken as the officer assessing, that's the reason why the crossovers, and rightfully so, in Campbell Street with Bluestone Curve and Channel should be part of an operational works condition as part of this subdivision. Because of the very nature, I'm aware of other people that had to go through an engineer-approved crossover because of the depth of that water carriage. So it's not as though they're going to go and slap up a whatever crossover. It has to meet the spec. And
Councillor to the Chair, that's correct. So there's actually conditions that were, recommended as part of an approval that would mean that they would have to get an operational works permit for their driveway crossovers because of the bluestone curving.
thank you, Chair.
Any further questions for the officer? No? Thank you so much, Tamara. Now, James, did you want a chance to come up and answer some questions? Had you been making some notes on some of the questions so far? Yeah, yep.
I've got some scribble here that I'll try and reinterpret. Good afternoon, councillors. Well, sorry. I think perhaps if I can just cover off on maybe the key element of why we're here, which Tamara's touched on, which is that the lot length is 26 centimetres too long. The width is actually, in terms of what the RAL code says is 10 metres, is what council's acceptable outcome is in this zone. So we're actually, in terms of our width, we're larger than what the acceptable outcome is by, we're 10.058. The minimum width is 10.00. So I think in terms of what we're talking about is the impact on a person standing in Campbell Street, imagining that 3 houses are constructed, then looking at that lot length and saying that 26 centimetres in terms of the back of that block causes a difference or an impact in terms of the character of that streetscape. I think the critical dimension here is width, and that's what we actually exceed in terms of the minimum width dimension. We also exceed the minimum area dimension of 450 square metres. So each of these lots are at 508 square metres. So it's the length that is the problem in terms of why it's been referred. In terms of the design that follows, obviously we can't give you certainty about what that design is because they're going to be up to be designed by the people that own these lots in the future. But what we can say, particularly in an area like Campbell Street, is there exist a number of options that we can look at in terms of achieving a design for neighbourhood character that works. And when I say that, tandem configuration works because you can also look at things like car lifts in this instance. So the argument of saying that a single car garage won't be constructed here isn't correct because we've got other alternative solutions that we can do. And the reality is that in a position like this, that end price means that you can look at those solutions. So touching on Stuart's point there are plenty of examples that mean we can achieve a single width garage at 3.5 metres within our width of 10. So it doesn't become the dominant element within the street. I think also on that point as well, where our lot length is over 50 metres long. And so our lots will have to be, if we comply with the code, set back somewhere between 10 or 11 metres from Campbell Street. So they're not right on the street. They're a long way back. They're 10 or 11 metres back. And their council, if they impose their code, as they will, when we lodge a subsequent application for a house, can require the single width garage to this street, given we're at 10 metre frontages. So I think whilst there's a lot of concern there, council has control over that next step because it's going to be as part of a subsequent development application to you. I note that houses are code accessible, units and dual occupancies, council has already made a decision that they'll be impacted in this zone. So if it's anything else, even though that's not our intent, there's an opportunity for community engagement and submission on that as well. In terms of Councillor Taylor, I think you mentioned the street trees. You'll see from that photo before that the street tree that exists there, has an existing crossover next to it. The intention would be to retain that as is and reuse it. So the crossover that's within the street, which you can see there, is that lot 1 on the eastern side would retain the existing crossover that's there, and then new crossovers would have to be constructed, obviously, for 2 and 3. And there's no objection and a willingness to look at the bluestone curbing. In fact, obviously, it's already been conditioned that it has to be that way. In terms of the stormwater management plan, I think it's not that we're resisting and not providing that, it's just that mapping actually isn't part of the planning scheme yet. So it's draft mapping that we didn't have access to originally, and there's no objection from us to look at incorporating and updating our stormwater management plan. The condition as drafted, we've reviewed, it's acceptable, we'll do that work. Again, it's on the assumption of what a future house design will be, because again, we don't know what the final design is at this point, but we can make assumptions in relation to site cover, etc., noting that we've obviously already got a neighbourhood character, a multiple dwelling on the site that's quite large in itself. So we're not talking about a completely impervious site to an impervious one. In relation to the neighbourhood character place component, obviously we can only deal with what we have, and that's that in 2012 council decided not to include this as a neighbourhood character place. So it is in the 46 mapping, but a site-by-site assessment was done by council, by Ivan McDonald from memory, the heritage architect, and he resolved, or their practice resolved what places would be included and excluded, and this one was ultimately excluded from that list, given that it's been updated to the extent that it probably doesn't look sympathetic with a traditional character place. So there's actually no requirement for us to, consider that component. We're able to demolish it under a building approval, and I think that the reality is that we'll end up with 3 homes that are architecturally designed, which make a far better improvement to the streetscape. And I think the only other items, happy to take some more questions, but more just, reiterating that in this instance, there are plenty of solutions to achieve a design outcome that means we don't have a double 6 metre wide garage that sits within 2 metres of the street. In fact, it won't be tolerated or contemplated by council, and that we'll be able to achieve an architecturally designed home that has plenty of space at 508 metres. It's going to have a 20 metre backyard or longer, that will be able to accommodate a functional house and also contribute positively to the street. So happy to take any further questions from the councillors if you'd like.
Good, thanks, James. Councillor Carl to start, and then Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. James, I note your comment about using the existing crossover. Is there opportunity practically to look at the combined use of one single, perhaps albeit a little wider, dual driveway to the two residents that would be to the bottom side of that existing, well, to the left side of that existing crossover?
I think, Councillor, you end up with the design outcome that you're trying to avoid, because then you have both garages touching one another and they're going to be 6 metres wide in their total aggregate, if that's what you've got to look at. So I think the better thing is actually to have them separated. They're going to be 3 metres wide, and that gives an opportunity to, someone to walk across that driveway, stop, walk across the driveway. I think just in relation to that as well, if someone knows that obviously everyone knows that Campbell Street footpath, it's completely sealed now, so there's no sort of green verge that's getting chewed up by crossovers. It's 100% sealed as it is now. Obviously, there will be an additional crossover or 2 additional crossovers further west at 2 and 3, but it's not consuming what is green verge. It's 100% sealed.
Yeah, I guess a comment, if I may, Chair. James, you're not going to convince me that 3 new dwellings will have not have more impervious surface for water, stormwater to run off, and besides that's a deco granite driveway which does have a degree of soakage as opposed to the potential for concrete or other such sealed surfaces, and I can imagine just visually or proportionally there much less lawn in the front to soak up stormwater. So I'm a bit of a stickler for the officer's recommendation, I'm sorry, around dealing with stormwater.
There's no objection from us on that, Councillor, I guess, so that would be just the response there, that we can do that, happy to. We provided 3 draft designs of what houses might look like, and we can easily, tomorrow's drafted condition, we've reviewed, obviously it's available and we're happy to accept it, so I think there's no objection from us on that one.
Thanks.
Rebecca, Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you. Hi, James. Hi. You were talking just before about if this is approved, if the reconfiguration's approved, that there's the opportunity then for council to consider and tolerate whatever the design is, the design outcomes. And it's a question for you or one of our officers. Does it have to come back to council, or could it go to a private certifier?
No, it has to come through council. So council made that amendment, and I think Councillor Summerfield, you're jogging my memory, which is ordinary at the moment, but for Joffrey Street, I recall that might have been an issue at the time when it could go through private certification for design, when it could do a building referral, and that was the issue in that point, is that council didn't get to see it from memory. Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in this instance, 100%, whether it's a house or whether it's a multiple dwelling, which is not what's proposed anyway, but it has to come through council and it has to be approved by officers before a building approval can be issued.
And just as an overall question through you, Madam Chair, when you cast your mind forward, if this were to be approved, we've got the 3 dwellings there, you're confident that you know the codes, you know everything, all the parameters that you'd be working, or another architect would be working with him, and you're confident that that can be met and achieved?
Yes, a 10-metre wide lot is not an uncommon requirement in character areas. I mean, you look not only for Toowoomba, but you look at Brisbane and other areas. There are literally hundreds of examples of where well-considered responsive design in traditional building character areas can be achieved in a way that they provide, obviously, a contemporary design outcome for the people that want to live and use them now, because we live differently, but they contribute to the streetscape and respect the streetscape that they're sited in. So, yeah, I have no issues with that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you. So a couple of questions, if I could. 508 square metres per block would mean that you could build a reasonably large size building on there, catering for more than 1 or 2 people, which the single car garage could result in cars just being parked on the street, clogging up the streets more, would be a potential outcome if they've all only got single garages. Would that be right?
There's a couple of options there. So in terms of if a two-car storage on site is required. Given that we've obviously got quite a long length, there's options for that to be able to have areas on site for those cars to be able to manoeuvre past each other without going on the street. So there's plenty of room on site for two cars. In terms of other options that are available here, which I meant, there are a number of other options around car lifts, car storage, which allow for a single width garage, but then allow the person the functionality to be able to pick what car they want to go out of. So there are other options that are being considered elsewhere, and they're regularly considered in character areas. So that's where you still achieve, obviously the inconvenience that people perceive for a tandem is that you've got to obviously negotiate with whoever's in your household about who's using what car. I mean, there are other design choices which are completely viable here that allow for single width garage designs with the functionality that people will expect here as well.
You could always surprise me with a car lift being installed. I'll leave that one open.
Sure.
So the 50% footprint would be part of this, wouldn't it? I'll probably direct that more at Stuart or yourself. 50%, wouldn't it?
Yes, so there'll be a requirement not only through that but also at building approval stage for QDC, which has a standard requirement of 50% site cover as well, and again requiring discretion from council if that's exceeded.
Yeah. So my only other concern is you've got this house there at the moment, which is long in length, but it's facing north, which is being able to capture, you know, what we're trying to get good environmental outcomes, less electricity, more use of the sun to get heat into a house and all that sort of thing. And we're going to reverse that if we do these 3 lots because they're going to be lengthways that way, which means the only bit of sun they're going to get is right at the back, the little bit of at the back. So I'm concerned that that's a negative outcome from this, is one of the things, you know.
So, it's 3 flats at the moment, so they're individually partitioned. So I guess they don't have windows on their common wall with their other units. So they're actually quite similar in terms of their private open space areas are at their rear as well, because they're three flats. So I think when we get into having 3 separate houses which will actually be separated, and I think you will be able to achieve a design outcome. The backyards are all north facing, and at 10 metres wide, you'll still be able to then have side boundary setbacks. So every house has windows on either side, which is different to what that is now.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked that. Sure.
Can I ask James, just remind me, so our minimum lot size at the moment in the planning scheme is 480 square metres?
Well, there's 2 requirements there. So the minimum lot size on the zone, in the LMR zone, is 300 square metres, but because we're in the neighbourhood character area, that goes up to 450 square metres effectively, because otherwise it'd be an impact accessible DA. So 450 is effectively the minimum, and the minimum width under the REL code is 10 metres.
10, okay, and you're 10.05 and they're 508, is it? That's right, isn't it? Or 500, these lots?
508. So the pre-existing length of the block means that we just exceed that 1:5 ratio of width to length by 26 centimetres over a 50-metre run.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for James? Councillor McMahon?
Thank you, Chair. James. The blue stone at the front, which is heritage listed, and Campbell Street, you've already said it's quite steep. There's 1 driveway over there and we're putting 2 more. Last thing we want is to have heritage bluestone and then we cover it all up with driveways over the top. So you'll be putting 2 more, probably 3 metre wide driveways over that. Perhaps, I don't know, is there any issues in our heritage scheme of covering up heritage listed stuff with driveways, I suppose? It's the best way to frame that.
I guess in terms of heritage listing, the bluestone isn't exactly heritage listed, but it is acknowledged as being an element which contributes to the streetscape. And I think that's then why a condition's been imposed on us requiring an engineering approval for our driveway crossovers as well as stormwater and other items to be able to show how that's detailed.
Okay.
All right. I think you're done. Thank you very much, James. Oh, beg your pardon, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just like to say we actually have a policy around bluestone curbs, and whilst it mightn't be technically heritage listed, it's very important to the history of this place, and that is a very deep gutter, and the water runs down there like a river in a big event.
Okay. Lovely, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, can I have someone move that we reinstate standing orders, please? Councillor McDonald, Councillor Antonio. Sorry, all those in favour? All right. Okay, so the recommendation is that council approve application RAL 2021-1183 for development permit for reconfiguration of a lot, code 2 into 3 lots pursuant to the provisions of section 60 of the Planning Act 2016 and subject to the conditions listed below. Do I have someone move that motion? Mr Mayor. Councillor Antonio, seconded by Councillor Carl. Anyone want to move into debate?
Yes.
Councillor Shine. Oh, so have someone speak to it. Councillor Antonio.
Well, I think I've made it fairly clear earlier in the meeting that I'm comfortable with the recommendation. I think the conditions that will apply in different areas from here in will protect what needs to be protected.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Speaker against, Councillor Shine.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. The very reasons why I'm opposing it are the reasons put forward positively by the Mayor, that I don't think it's going to encourage protection of heritage listed areas or character areas in the future. Let's think about this. This street, Campbell Street, in my view, and I could be wrong, as others probably like this street better, but I think it's the prettiest, and why people come to Toowoomba to drive up and down Campbell, just below the gardens there. It's just outstanding because of the old houses there, particularly on the right. I grant you this one here isn't great, but I just can't understand why we would risk interfering with that heritage overlay issue. And you only have to look across the road, and I'm sure other councillors have phone calls from a certain gentleman who describes them as sheds. A lot of people like Hampton buildings, but some don't. This fellow doesn't, who I'm sure will be on to councillors shortly if he's watching today. Clearly the reason why we haven't heard anything from the residents is because they're not told about this. This is code accessible. And that in itself, raises an issue with me that we should be pretty cautious about how we're proceeding with this. I think it will shock people that this is going to be allowed, and they've been very worried about what the future is going to hold with similar lots in Campbell Street. As I said before, I just cannot believe that we are interfering with, in my view, the most precious street in Toowoomba in this way. And I think it will have ultimately an adverse effect on our tourist potential as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shine. Speaker 4, Councillor Carl.
I support the motion and the move of the motion for a number of reasons that I've probably already raised, but just to summarise, I'm comfortable that the stormwater as part of the operational works will be managed correctly. The driveways as part of operational works will also be managed correctly. I'm comfortable that given the setbacks and the options explained by the applicant's representative to even set back further than the minimum requirement, that the ambience or appearance from the street would be sympathetic to the area, and that garages won't be as domineering as suspected, given the mandatory setback in this area and the potential for the length of the block to actually go beyond that. I'm also conscious of the fact that herein, for me, as my opinion, lies a classic example of allowing tasteful living choice within an existing brownfield area, within acceptable distances from critical services that people may not need to jump in a motor vehicle in the future. We need to be able to think creatively about how we cater for living choice in these areas. And if we to Mr Shine's, Councillor Shine's comments about how we would even consider tampering with, well, the house itself is a legacy in question that isn't consistent, in my view, and that is a legacy in itself. And I'd suggest as 3 flats, not possibly the highest and best outcome that we could leave. And as far as the history, to my knowledge, is a case of it is a result of evolution. And if we consider the next 50 to 100 years forward, providing these buildings are done correctly and to today's engineering standards, remember these houses will have to be properly designed to fit in these areas, we could be appreciating history in the next 50 to 100 years' time as a result of evolution, rather than dealing with the legacy that's left there. So I'm comfortable that we've covered the bases that we need to. I'll be looking very keenly in the future at the type of and extent of the design and how these 3 dwelling houses will be sympathetic to the area. But I say again, to use Councillor Kerry's words, tamper with, history is a living proof of evolution of how we come about with the areas that we have in the city. And we can drive around to many places in the city and there are some real not so good legacies sprinkled all throughout this area on the east side of Toowoomba. Hopefully we will see some of those redeveloped tastefully in the future to provide living choice. Thanks.
Another speaker against? Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm having trouble with the visual amenity of this area. I agree. Campbell Street's one of our most beautiful leafy streets. The residence on these 2 blocks of land, and it sits over the 2 blocks of land, has been neglected for quite some time and could still easily be turned into a beautiful residence. In fact, one of the owners in my time sitting around this table purchased this with just that intention in mind, to turn it into a family home. It didn't happen, but it has been neglected for many years. And I struggle to understand how it was left out of the character declaration at the time. I struggle to understand that, because even though it has been neglected, it still looks to be reasonably structurally sound. I'm certainly not against, I agree with a lot of things about small blocks, but it's horses for courses. And some of those other streets have got short, small frontages, and they actually even have the night cart laying down the back of them. So that's where they were balanced out, because they had a front and a back entrance, despite the fact they were quite narrow. So I just think that in no way, no matter however it's conditioned, that these blocks can add to the amenity of this part of Campbell Street. So I can't be convinced, and I don't see how it can add to this. And, you know, be aware that you can have death by 1,000 cuts, and these areas are very valuable because of where they are, and they're valuable because of the residences and the amenity that's there, provided by the trees, the wide frontages and the beautiful, beautiful buildings that are there. And if this continues to cannibalise those, then that will be lost. So, no, I can't support it.
Speaker for the motion? Councillor McMahon.
Thanks, Chair. I agree with the concerns regarding the amenity. At the end of the day, if these blocks were 26 centimetres shorter, we wouldn't be here. It'd be done in an office and it'd be done like that. I think I can think of several examples where new developments are done tastefully to reflect character, and I'm confident that the provisions here will allow that. All along that area, we see houses of a similar nature that have been renovated, modified, kept the character, and some of them, I think, done really, really well. And I don't think it has to be a case of new development is ugly. I think new development can be very tasteful. when done well and done within the guidelines, and I'm confident that that will be done here. So happy to speak for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Another speaker against? Councillor Van Hoff?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've agonised about this one, and I actually, in my mind's eye, can see 3 really beautifully designed homes in that area, on those blocks that would look terrific, and I'd be very happy to live in myself. The problem is that this is code accessible, and we read right here that it doesn't meet the code, albeit by 26 centimetres. And you can say that's not much, and it's not much. But if it's not 26 centimetres, then is 27 centimetres okay? We're starting to be subjective. So if 27's okay, is a metre okay? Is a metre and a half? Unfortunately, in this position, we have to play by some rules. And when I got onto council, I always wanted to be clear-headed and as objective as I could be. And on this one, my heart is saying vote in favour of allowing the reconfiguration, but my head, given that this is a code accessible application, albeit one that just barely fails to meet the code and has come to us, it doesn't meet the code. So for that reason, I have to vote against it.
Do I have another speaker for the motion? Councillor McDonald?
Thanks, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you for all the presentations that come through. And I guess Councillor Von Hoff makes a very good point. If it doesn't meet the code, and I guess that's why we're here to discuss it. In this case, it's 26 centimetres longer than what would be required, albeit the block size itself is 50 square metres greater than what it needs to be, and the frontage is over the width that is required to meet the code. And I totally agree that we can get a good outcome with the right design, and this is where I guess our heritage architect people and everyone gets involved, and hopefully we've got those measures in place to achieve that, and I've got confidence that we have got it. So therefore, on the balance, given that we may be 26 centimetres longer than what's required, we're also wider than what's required, and we're larger block than what's required. So if you put the lens over a test of fairness on all measures, they've got they certainly the recommendation from officers I respect, and with the correct conditions on it, which are in there, I see no reason why we shouldn't support it.
So any speakers against? No. Okay, well, with that, we have a mover and a seconder. So all those in favour of the recommendation? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. Councillor Summerfield? No, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those against is 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, Councillor Summerfield, sorry. Sorry, I thought that you were, yes. Can I do that again? Sorry, I get nervous when I'm doing the count. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's carried. Thank you. I voted against. Thank you, everyone. That's closing the meeting.